Good evening. Oh, that wasn't so good. Let's try again. Good evening. Thank you. Welcome to the third of our 5 celebrations of the 200th anniversary of the Presbyterian Church of Cadiz. Tonight we move toward talking about the missionary movement. Last time, if you'll recall, we talked about the different opinions that churches in this town, Presbyterian churches in this town, had towards slavery. One very pro-slavery, one very abolitionist, anti-slavery, and ultimately that was settled, of course, by the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation and some things like that, as much as it is settled. And in the life of the church, what that did was the church became very interested in things national, in life beyond themselves. And at the same time, the church was having a sort of revivalist notion of taking on personal piety and being responsible for our own spirituality. And where that grew was into a place where Christians wanted to take the word of Jesus into the world. And that is the place where we come tonight. I'm looking at a magazine called Mission Crossroads, which is produced by the mission arm of our denomination. And it's talking about the fact that for 180 years, Presbyterians have been deeply engaged in worldwide mission. So if you think this is 200 years of celebration of the church, for 180 years we've been doing mission. This congregation was not far behind. But here's some of what it has to say here. Scores of mission societies were established in Europe and America during the early decades of the 19th century. The first mission society in the U.S. was the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, an interdenominational organization that was largely the creation of the Congregationalists. Congregationalists are essentially our cousins in the faith. Under the American Board, Presbyterian missionaries were sent to India, Siam, and Africa. And you'll see, with very few exceptions, all the missionaries that came out of this congregation went to India or to Egypt. So that was true for here as well. Many Presbyterians, however, were not comfortable with this arrangement. They believed that mission should be at the heart of the church's activity, not something outsourced to other organizations. For Presbyterians, the issue was caught up in the new school, old school controversy of the 1830s. And consequently, when the church split in 1837, don't think that church splits are something new to us. We've been doing them all our lives as Presbyterians. The old school faction established the Board of Foreign Missionaries with its headquarters in New York. This is the origin of our current Presbyterian World Mission, a ministry of the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Over the years, World Mission has operated under different names and at various times served as a mission organization of the Northern, Southern, and United branches of the Presbyterian Church. And today it serves the nationwide Presbyterian Church USA. Much of the impetus for mission in the 19th and early 20th centuries was the desire to fulfill the Great Commission that Jesus issued before his ascension. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. This approach achieved its clearest expression in 1886 with the famous watchword of the student volunteer movement, the evangelization of the world in this generation. And the student volunteer movement, by the way, still exists and is still very active in world mission. Yet missionaries in these years were rarely simply evangelists. They were generally engaged in holistic mission, building schools and hospitals, translating the Bible, and seeking social reform. And lest we forget, women played a key role from the beginning in Presbyterian mission. It was women who formed the mission support organizations that raised the funds and provided much of the publicity that made foreign missions possible. Women were also missionaries. By 1830, women already constituted half of the missionaries sent by the Protestant mission societies in the U.S., and by 1900, this had shot up to 2/3 of all U.S. missionaries. Presbyterian women also established or supported a number of specific mission programs, including the Mission Yearbook of Prayer and Study, which, by the way, still exists, but not in paper form. You can read it online every day if you wish. The Presbyterian Hunger Program and the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program. And lest you have any questions about that, I hold in my hand a 100-year-old document. This is from the First Presbyterian Church of Cadiz, Ohio, 1917 to 1918, and it is the Monday evening circle of the Ladies' Home Missionary Society. And in it, it outlines their program for the year, which begins in January with the Treasury, because they started with what was important, and then talks about the February meeting, about Cuba. Then they were talking about Puerto Rico, which is, of course, spelled P-O-R-T-O, Rico. Mexico, the Native Americans, Alaska, Mormonism, the Mountaineers, and I don't think they meant West Virginia football, immigration, and the Christmas meeting. So even here we see the same kind of idea that we're reaching into the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Tonight we're going to hear vignettes of the wonderful folks who have gone from this congregation out into the world to serve in Jesus' name. If you are looking at your historical narrative that's in there, those of you who are reading, we're going to go in order of the names on the last page there, which means we're going to begin with Esther Anderson. So if you would just come up as you can, and we'll read, and we'll learn a lot about folks who went from Cadiz into the world. I do also want to say that we are grateful, as we have been and will be for the next, as we have been for the last two and will be for the next two, to Dr. Scott Pendleton for our bulletins and our historical narrative tonight. Thank you, Dr. Pendleton. And I will also say that we are very grateful tonight for the vignettes, because they come as part of the 175th anniversary celebration, and were written and put together by Jim and Virginia McFarland. So when you see Virginia, be sure and tell her thank you for the wonderful work that she's done preserving our history.
Esther E. Anderson. Esther E. Anderson, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. W.B. Anderson, was born in Archer Township. She attended school in Jewett, Franklin College, the Medical Department of Ohio State University, and then she spent a year with Women's Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1907, she went to China and worked as Su Chow, an institution founded by Dr. Nathaniel Toker. He returned to the States, and Dr. Anderson assumed full charge of this hospital, which is a charitable institution where all diseases of women and children were treated. She worked 9 years and was found to have a tumor. Dr. Anderson, with urging, returned to the hospital in Philadelphia for treatment, and she died there on November 1st, 1916, at the age of 35. Her funeral was held at the Cadiz Presbyterian Church, with 5 ministers taking part. They were Reverend R.P. Lippincott, Reverend Charles Gilmore, Reverend G.E. Henderson of New Athens, Reverend George P. Rowland of Steubenville, and Dr. O.C. Crawford, who had been a missionary at the Sioux Chow for 13 years. She is buried at the Ridge Presbyterian Church Cemetery. A quote from the news article went like this: "Before leaving China, she stated that nothing would suit her better than to continue her labors as long as she possessed sufficient strength. And when the end came, she was willing that her remains be interred in that far-off land among the people she had striven to heal and cure."
Gertrude Newland Jamison. Gertrude Newland Jamison was born in Harrison County, the daughter of James W. and Elizabeth Newland. The Newlands made their home in Cadiz after 1905. Gertrude Newland married Reverend William Brainerd Jamison, a clergyman of the United Presbyterian Church. They both served as missionaries in Egypt. Gertrude Newland attended Westminster College in Pennsylvania, where she met her future husband. In September 1915, a group of missionaries sailed on the Greek ship Athene, but evacuated the ship due to a fire. They were rescued, but without any goods. They spent 6 weeks in New York and then started out again. When asked by a reporter what they would do, Gertrude remarked that they would buy what they needed and start for Egypt again. After 2 years of language study in Cairo, the Jamisons were stationed in Luxor, where Reverend Jamison was a district evangelist. Gertrude was famous as a hostess for mission friends visiting the antiquities, yet found time to work with the church women and Bible teachers. She was also a well-known vocalist. They nurtured 2 young sons, Wallace and Paul, who later was a doctor at Tanta Hospital. Later, the Jamisons moved to Tanta, where Mr. Jamison was the hospital chaplain and district evangelist. The Jamisons served from 1915 until 1951 and retired in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania.
Thomas Ellsworth Holliday. Thomas E. Holliday was born January 16, 1862, at the family farm about 6 miles west of Cadiz. He attended Franklin College, Ohio State University, and the United Presbyterian Seminary at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thomas Holliday married Lena May Hayes on August 7, 1889, and the young couple sailed for India and the mission field. Mary and Eleanor were born. Rheumatic fever forced them to bring Mary to Cadiz in 1895. Laura was born in the spring of 1896. Thomas E. returned to India alone and was assigned to Garalwa, Punjab. And that name is wrong, other than Punjab, for evangelistic work. The family sailed for India in 1898. In the lonely station of Kanga Dorgan, this family built a self-propagating church from the depressed peoples of India. This was the passion of Thomas E. Holliday and his family. Dorothy and John were born there. In 1904, while traveling to Martinpierre, contaminated water caused John's death from diphtheria. The family returned to America, and Thomas studied psychology at Worcester College. He returned to India alone in 1906. May Holliday and the younger girls returned to India, and the older girls completed schooling in the States. May, Laura, and Dorothy came home for Mary's graduation from college in 1913. Thomas returned on furlough in 1915. In 1916, Thomas and May went to India without children. They went to Sargada and continued evangelistic work. May was a great comfort to young missionaries. She nursed the sick, and babies were born in their home. On December 28, 1917, May passed away during a second operation for breast cancer. She is buried beside her little son John in Mission Cemetery in Hobspur. Later, Thomas served in Julum. During his furlough in 1923-1924, he studied at the University of Chicago in the School of Theology. He was asked to give some lectures at Xenia Theological Seminary. On his way, he stopped at Mammoth, Illinois, and there suffered a heart attack during the night of March 27, 28, 1924. He is buried in the Cadiz Cemetery. The children of Thomas E. and Mary Hayes Holloway were Mary Grace, Eleanor Catherine, Laura Cummings, Dorothy May, and John Glencairn Holliday. Their daughter, Mary Grace Holliday, the daughter of Thomas E. Holliday, was born in Punjab, India in 1891. She attended Woodstock School in India and later in Worcester, Ohio. She graduated from Western College for Women in Oxford, Ohio in 1913. She worked in Cleveland and Toledo in social work. She was married to Harvey A. Schuler in 1915, and she died in 1959. Daughter Dorothy May Holliday, daughter of Thomas E. Holliday, was born in 1899 in India. She attended the Woodstock School at Lahore. She attended the Western College for Women in Oxford, Ohio, and was graduated in 1921. She married Reverend James Beveridge Collins. They served as missionaries in Rawalpindi, West Pakistan.
My great aunt was the third woman ever to graduate from West Virginia University Medical School. And I believe that that was in 1928. So when we hear that there are two women on our list of missionaries who were medical doctors who got their degrees, one in 1894 and one in 1907, understand that these were truly pioneer women. And one of those was Dr. Anna B. Watson, MD. Born in Harrison County in 1866, she was buried at the Unity Presbyterian Cemetery just beyond New Athens in 1958. Her sister, Adeline M. Watson, was born in 1863 and was also buried in Unity in 1913. These two sisters were medical doctors in a time when women in the medical field was a much more rare event than it is today. Adeline Watson did much medical work among the poor in Pittsburgh. However, Anna B. Watson became a medical missionary for the United Presbyterian Church in 1896 and traveled to Egypt, where she became a valuable member of the mission in Tanta and Benha. One of her first challenges was to learn Arabic. Most missionaries were given time to study, but her schedule as a physician kept her busy. By 1900, she took the competency test by reading from an Arab medical journal and 50 pages from the Quran. Although most of her patients were of the Muslim faith, she became especially close to the women and children. A hospital committee was formed to make plans to construct a hospital that needed to be in keeping with Muslim tradition. It was here that the women and children became the focus. Dr. Watson had a vacation back to the States in 1903. Then upon her return, work was completed on the Tanta Hospital, and it was opened April 18, 1904. It was the only hospital in Egypt that exclusively cared for women and children. It was interesting to read that a gardener was employed at $6 a month to grow vegetables and fruit for the hospital. Medical work was extended to the Delta area, and she was appointed to oversee and work in that area. Dr. Watson was permitted to take a 6-month vacation from December 1, 1908, she paying her travel expenses and securing a substitute without expense to the mission. It was an unpaid vacation, in other words. And then this one, Jim and Virginia McFarland have added a correction, which says, Anna Watson was from the New Athens Church and attended the New Athens Presbyterian Church, and they have in question, parentheses in question, the Unity Church, until it disbanded. She moved to Cadiz and lived with her sister at the corner of Park and Grant Streets, first house on the right as entry into Park Avenue from Grant. She would be more correctly identified as a daughter of the New Athens Church. And it doesn't really matter because she is a grand missionary from Harrison County who did tremendous work in Egypt on behalf of the poor. Somebody have the holidays? Holidays we did. Does somebody have Albert and Mrs. Johnson? Okay. Albert and Mrs. Johnson are on the front of your bulletin tonight. And what Dr. Pendleton has written and is mostly quotation from letters from Mrs. Johnson, and it is absolutely beautiful. So let me read this part to you. The Johnsons sailed for India 2 months after their marriage in 1855. They were stationed in Fatehgarh Mission on the plains of India when the Indian insurrection of 1857, or the first war for Indian independence, depending on where your sympathies lie, broke out. In June 1858, the rebellion reached their remote area, and the Johnsons fled for their lives. The area around them was in turmoil, and no safe way out could be found. In her last letter, listen to this, this is amazing what she wrote. In her last letter to her sister, Mrs. Johnson wrote, 2nd June, although trials and sorrows may assail us in this dark land, we may be called upon to part with life for Christ and his cause. And then get this. May we not glorify him more by our death than by our life. May the perils through which we have already passed be the means of bringing us nearer to Christ. We must only wait, the will of God respecting us. We look upon each day now as our last, but oh, how delightful are our seasons of prayer together, imploring the care and protection of that God who alone can save us. In a few hours we fly. The whole country is now in arms. Farewell, farewell. Perhaps you shall never hear from me again. 6 days later, their escaping boat was aground due to low water in the Ganges. They huddled on an island until the 12th, when they were taken captive, marched for a day to Cawnpore, and they were shot on the morning of June 13th, 1858. Somebody have Mr. William Johnson, Reverend William Johnson?
William F. Johnson. William F. Johnson was born in Cadiz on March 16, 1823. His father, William, was a physician. The father died when young Will was 9 months old, and his mother died when Will was a young child. He grew up in the home of an aunt and uncle. His brother, Albert Johnson, was a missionary in India and died during the Sepoy Rebellion in 1857. Young Will pledged to take his brother's place in the mission field. He entered Western Theological Seminary, Allegheny, Pennsylvania, and graduated in the spring of 1860. Will married Rachel Lily Kerr on June 5, 1860, and the couple went to India in July 1860. At the time of his second furlough in 1884, there were 6 children, and the mission field in India had become dangerous. Will did not want to leave his children in America without him, so he resigned from foreign service until his children were grown. He traveled throughout the United States for the foreign missionaries of the Presbyterian Church. In 1886, William F. Johnson became the president of Biddle University in Charlotte, North Carolina. It grew quickly in number of students, academic excellence, and facilities. In 1880, he was planning to return to India when his wife, Rachel, died in a buggy accident. 10 years later, in 1890, his son, Edward, died of typhoid fever. This happened just before William and Edward and his wife were to go to the mission field in India. However, in 1892, William and his oldest daughter, Mary, returned to India. Mary was secretary and assistant to her father. William is credited with translating 400 books into Hindu or Urdu. Wow. Will died in Landour, India, June 19, 1926, at the age of 88 years.
Milton McConnell and Nately Ronsheim. Milton Mack and Nately Ronsheim, members of the Presbyterian Church of Cadiz, Ohio, served as volunteers in mission for the Presbyterian Church in 2 fields, both India and Utah. They spent 3 months in 1974-75 in India visiting Presbyterian missionaries, Presbyterian-founded schools, and hospitals. Returning home, they spoke at churches, presbyteries, and synod, relating the history of Presbyterian work, past and present, and spelling out the need for continued support. Mr. Ronsheim also did considerable interpretive writing for the denomination. On 3 occasions, they led month-long mission study tours to India and Nepal under a support agency UPCUSA program, visiting mission projects, schools, and hospitals. In 1992, they were volunteers in mission to Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah, a Presbyterian-related secondary school, filling in various positions over 4 months. Mr. Ronsheim also served as a volunteer in mission to the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland in 1984, developing materials to be used in funds-raising campaigns. Also, part-time over 2 years, he was a volunteer in mission to the Synod of the Northeast, putting together the necessary elements to start a synod-wide newspaper. The Ronsheims participated in a missionary study tour of Indonesia, sponsored by the Presbytery of Los Ranchos in 1990. And I didn't bring it, but I do have a picture of one of their trips to India of the group standing with Mother Teresa.
Does somebody have something on David Thompson? Oh, yes. Be kind to Saunders. She's not a public speaker. Yeah.
David Thompson was an early missionary in Japan. He was born in Archer Township, Harrison County, Ohio, September 21st, 1835, and died in 1915. He is buried in Somai Municipal Cemetery in Tokyo, Japan. He was schooled in Franklin College, Washington, and Jefferson College, Western Theological Seminary, and Allegheny Theological Seminary. He received his PhD from Worcester College in Worcester, Ohio. He went to Japan as a missionary in 1863 and served as a minister in Tokyo. He taught at the university and was the first Presbyterian minister in Tokyo. He served as an interpreter and Japanese secretary of the American legation in Tokyo for 7 years. He married an Irish girl who was also a missionary, Miss Mary E. Perks. They had 2 children that were born in Tokyo. Ruth Ray Thompson, born November 2nd, 1876, and Grace was born January 1st, 1880. Both attended Worcester College and returned to Japan for a while. David Thompson was a grandson of the Reverend John Ray, the earliest known minister of the Cadiz Presbyterian Church, and he was also a grandson of David T. Thompson, organizer of the First United Presbyterian Church of Cadiz. A Japanese businessman, Koji Nakajima,
Yep, that's him.
cool beans, from Tokyo was in Cadiz in April 1991 to research David Thompson's roots. He is Presbyterian and grateful to the Presbyterian Church for sending missionaries to Japan.
Dr. Pendleton's not entirely sure, but he thinks that it's possible that David Thompson may have been the first Presbyterian missionary in Japan, or possibly even the first foreign missionary from the U.S. in Japan. Note, too, that the one we do not have any press on for tonight is James Patterson Miller, who was a domestic missionary on the Oregon Trail. And make sure that you're reading all the fun stuff that's in here, because the lives of these people were absolutely fascinating. And as we speak about a fascinating life, note that the one missionary among us who has not yet joined the Church Triumphant is here tonight. And so, Dr. Pendleton, might you tell us a word about the good Ms. Markley?
I am honored to talk about Mary. I'm primarily going to read her words. You can read the write-up I did on her. I've interviewed her several times about her mission work, and eventually I'm going to do a story on her for the Jim Hinker. It's in my files. So this is Mary's words. Gertrude Jamison was the Sabbath school teacher who influenced my mother, Helen Shivers Markley, to want to become a missionary. My mother's devotion to faith, in the words of a medical missionary, led me to want to serve as a missionary. Mary was sitting in the front pew and the UP church had a missionary, and she told me that when I asked her, why did you decide? And she said, I listened to him speak and I was called to mission at that time. So there are good things that happen in the front pew of a Presbyterian church.
Amen.
I was born in Cadiz and graduated from Cadiz High School and from Muskingum College. I was sent to the oldest girls' boarding school in Cairo, Ezbekaya, I have no idea if that's correct, for 3 years as a short-term teacher of English and any other subject taught in English. This was from 1948 to 1951. If you look on the back of your bulletin, this is the cover of the United Presbyterian, Volume 106, number 30 from 1948. In the lower right corner is our dear Mary as probably 23-year-old, 22, 23-year-old, 1948, I'm not sure. So that's Mary, one of 5 Marys and a Marian that were missionaries that year. In 1954, I returned to Egypt as a regular missionary. Now, a regular missionary is a 5-year term, and they go learn the language, etc. Before that, she was a teaching missionary. To study Arabic, expecting to work in a mission school. A plea by Mrs. Ada Dunlap for someone to continue in women's work led to my assignment to that field. I was located in Asyut, where I worked under Ada and 2 presbyteries, visiting churches and encouraging women. A training program for young women was started in Asyut. During the winter, these young women held Sabbath school in local churches without pastors and daily vacation Bible school in the summer. Summer work also included youth conferences. Part of the visitation was done from the houseboat, the Ibis. And as a historical aside, the Ibis, as she says in here, it was saved for the mission at the time of the war between the states by Maharishi Singh, who married a Christian orphan who was studying at the Ezbekite Girls' School. The historical aside is the Maharishi saw his wife-to-be, Bumba Mueller, Bumba means pink, Bumba Mueller for the first time in the home of Henrietta Lee Harvey, who was another Cadiz missionary. So that's how, and he met and ultimately donated about 15 years after he'd been married, ultimately donated his Nile River ship to the Presbytery. And, well, let's see, almost 100 years later, Mary was still sailing on the same ship, which I think it's remarkable that the 2 Cadisonians would be involved in that ship. I worked with 4 exceptionally fine Bible women or teachers in 2 presbyteries. With the 1967 Arab-Jewish conflict, all Egyptian missionaries were reassigned for a year. I went to teach English at the Dutch Reform School in the Sultanate of Muscat in Oman from 1967 until 1963. She returned at her brother's request to help take care of her mother, who was elderly at the time, and she told me otherwise she would have stayed there for her entire career. So I have enjoyed my time spent with Mary. She has had a fascinating life. When she got out of Egypt or Oman, she didn't just come home, she went the long way. She visited Southeast Asia and Japan and all these different places. And she's really a fascinating person, and she's really enriched my life. And I'm very happy that we were able to honor her tonight.
Now, I've purchased a gift for Mary, which is from 10,000 Villages, which is a fair trade merchant. It is a prayer shawl made in Egypt from Egyptians, and I paid a whole bunch of money to make sure that it was here, delivered on time, and it's not here. So, Ms. Markley, when that arrives, you can enjoy your gift honoring you this evening, but in the meantime, let us honor with our applause Mary Markley. I believe downstairs we have goodies, and I'm sure that Mary will be receiving guests there. Note two other things as we move on to next month. Next month, we're going to have a wonderful presentation from Pam Ronsheim Gibson. She is reading from her grandmother's journals. And her grandmother not only talks in her journals about the history of the time, but also about the history of her congregation, which was this church. And it's very, very interesting stuff. But as we move into that, note two things have happened in the life or the lives of these congregations at this point. One is both have engaged in building new buildings. And the other is that here we now have this beautiful organ. Did you run off of my bulletin? I sure did. Well, you're a lousy guy. There's something else that happened, though. The organ and what else on the last sentence of that? The stained glass window, yeah. Those two important things have happened in the life of this church in this time period that we're talking about today. And we'll hear more about that as we hear from Pam's grandmother. Very exciting stuff. So, and remember that the culmination of our 200th anniversary is on October 1st. Here with worship at 11 o'clock, the Reverend Doug Ronsheim preaching, the Reverend Alan Jeffries administrating the sacraments, and we hope, if you've read in your newsletter, we are unveiling an anniversary fund, which will hopefully include the purchase of new hymnals, also be used for some building renovations, and we hope also the unveiling and renaming of the multipurpose room to the Betty and Bill Hudson room. Yes, Mr. Pendleton, Dr. Pendleton?
Next time for service, we're going to have a potluck dinner using recipes from the 1918 Presbyterian cookbook. It's not potluck. You're going to be assigned something. So we need cooks.
Right.
Yeah,
Sandra Jones will give you a recipe and you can cook something and bring it, so it will be potluck style, but you're cooking from that book. And I know some of you are looking puzzled, like, well, what's the difference there? Well, because they used half a gallon of lard and whole milk and whatever. So it was a very different kind of style of cooking. So next time we're going to meet at 6 instead of 7 and have a meal together, and then come up here and hear from Grandma. Friends, as you go from here, blessings to you. Please join together in fellowship downstairs.